The last time I saw his face, it wasn't outside my window. It was reflected in my bathroom mirror. That was when I realized he wasn't just watching me anymore. He was inside my house. It started 2 months ago, just after I moved into my apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, a second-floor walk-up in an old building with creaky wooden floors and a drafty living room, the kind of place you move into when you're saving for something better. At first, the quiet was peaceful. My last apartment had been noisy, neighbors yelling, cars honking all night. But here, I could finally relax, or so I thought. The first time I saw him was after a late shift. I work at a diner that stays open until midnight, so it wasn't unusual for me to get home in the early hours of the morning. That night, as I pulled the blinds down in my bedroom, I noticed him. A man standing across the street under the faint glow of a flickering street lamp. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring up at my window. At first, I thought he might have been looking at something behind me, maybe the tree outside. But when I stepped to the side, his gaze followed. I tried to make out his face, but he was too far away. There was something about the way he stood, completely still, that made my stomach tighten. I shut the blinds quickly, telling myself it was just some random guy, maybe a neighbor. The next morning, he was gone. A week passed, and I almost forgot about him. But then the strange little things started happening. My trash bin, which I always kept neatly tucked against the side of the building, was tipped over one morning. Papers and scraps were scattered across the ground. Annoyed, I cleaned it up, assuming it was raccoons. But then it happened again the next night. A few days later, I found my mailbox open. Nothing was missing, but I was sure I had closed it after checking my mail. These weren't exactly big things, but they started to add up, gnawing at the back of my mind. Then, one night, as I was scrolling through my phone in bed, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft, almost hesitant, like someone lightly knocking. My body froze. I live on the second floor. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, listening, my heart hammering in my chest. But the sound didn't come again. The next morning, I convinced myself it was the wind, even though the night had been perfectly still. From then on, I kept my curtains drawn. I thought it was over. After a few weeks of silence, I began convincing myself that I had imagined most of it, that maybe the stress of moving and work was messing with my head. But that fragile sense of relief didn't last long. One evening, I was washing dishes in the kitchen. The sun had just set, and the room was dim except for the light above the sink. As I glanced up from the soapy water, I saw him again. He was standing across the street in that same unnervingly still posture. His face was shadowed by the faint light of the street lamp, but I knew it was him. My first instinct was to turn off the kitchen light so I could see him better, but as soon as I moved to flip the switch, he stepped back, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there, heart pounding, staring out the window for what felt like forever, but he didn't come back into view. I closed the curtains and tried to shake the feeling, but I couldn't. That night, I didn't sleep. Over the next week, I started seeing him in places I wouldn't expect. At the grocery store, I turned down an aisle to grab some pasta sauce and caught a glimpse of him at the end of the row, pretending to browse the shelves. My stomach churned, and when I hurried to confront him, he was gone. Another time, I thought I saw him in the parking lot outside my apartment, leaning against a car. His head tilted slightly upward like he was watching my window again. I stared at him for a full minute before I worked up the courage to call out. But the moment I opened my mouth, the figure slipped into the darkness. The worst moment came one night at the movie theater. I'd gone with a coworker, desperate for a distraction. Halfway through the film, I felt it, that heavy, suffocating sensation of being watched. I turned my head slowly and saw him, sitting just 2 rows behind me. He wasn't watching the movie. His eyes were fixed on me. I whispered to my coworker, and when we both looked back, the seat was empty. Everywhere I went, he was there, close enough to see me, but always just out of reach. Then came the night that shattered any illusion of safety. I'd just gotten out of the shower, the bathroom fogged up from the steam. I was wiping the mirror when I noticed something strange. a small smear in the bottom corner. At first, I thought it was a watermark, but as I leaned closer, I realized it was on the outside. Confused, I leaned in closer. That's when I saw it, the faint outline of a handprint. My stomach dropped. My bathroom window doesn't open. Whoever left that handprint had to have climbed up 2 stories to get there. I called the police again, my voice trembling as I described what I'd found. They sent an officer to check it out, but once again there was no evidence of forced entry, no sign that anyone had been there. "It's probably just a prank," the officer said. "Kids messing around." But I knew better. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had been on edge for weeks, but this was different, more immediate, more tangible. The air in my apartment felt heavy and oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I went to bed with the knife under my pillow, just as I'd been doing every night. My heart wouldn't settle, thumping hard against my ribs as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the faint creaks and groans of the old building. Every noise felt amplified, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the fridge, the occasional rustle of wind against the windows. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Creak! My eyes flew open, and I held my breath. It wasn't the usual settling of the floorboards. This sound weighted it, deliberate, like a footstep. I sat up slowly, clutching the knife in one hand and straining to hear more. My room was pitch black, but my ears picked up everything, the pounding of my heartbeat, the faint whisper of my breathing, and then another creak. It was coming from the hallway. Moving as quietly as I could, I slid out of bed and pressed myself against the wall. The knife trembled in my grip and my palms were slick with sweat. Peeking around the corner of the bedroom door, I saw nothing but darkness. But I felt it, like someone was standing there watching me from the shadows. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Silence. I stepped into the hallway, my legs shaking so badly I thought they might give out. The faint light from the street lamp outside filtered through the cracks in the blinds, just enough to cast long shadows across the floor. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall and still, standing at the end of the hallway near the bathroom door. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its eyes on me, boring into me. I froze, unable to breathe, and for what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. Then in one frantic motion, I turned and bolted back to my room, slamming the door shut and shoving the dresser in front of it. I moved out the next day, leaving most of my belongings behind. I couldn't stay there, not after what had happened. But even now, months later, I still don't feel safe. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the sound of footsteps outside my window. Sometimes, I see a shadow lingering at the edge of my vision, gone when I turn to look. And now and then, just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear it. Tap, tap, tap. As the final chapter of our harrowing tale, The Silent Man at the Window, closes, we're left with a chilling reminder of the unseen threats that sometimes come far too close for comfort. Our protagonist may have escaped the physical confines of that eerie apartment, but the mental shackles of fear and paranoia still cling tightly, casting long shadows over the tranquility of everyday life. In the deep silence of the night, where every creak and whisper of the wind becomes a potential herald of unseen dangers, it's easy to imagine that malevolent eyes might still be watching, waiting. The echoes of those sinister taps are not just reminders of a threat that was perhaps never fully understood or confronted. They are the whispers of our deepest fears, made manifest in the most unsettling of ways. And so, as we part ways with this story, I urge you not to dismiss those fleeting shadows at the edge of your vision, or the odd noises that disrupt the stillness of your own home. Instead, let them be a call to remain vigilant and aware, because sometimes the price of ignorance is far too great. Remember, the boundaries between safety and danger can sometimes be as thin as the glass of a window or the surface of a mirror. Stay safe, stay alert, and keep the lights on just a little longer. Perhaps tonight is a good night to double-check the locks on your doors and windows before you head to bed. Thank you for joining me on this unnerving journey. If you're brave enough for more spine-tingling tales, don't hesitate to click on the next video. Who knows what mysteries await? Until next time, keep an eye out and take care not to let the shadows linger too long. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that will keep you up at night.